Hi! My name is Sidney, and I am, as you can probably tell, a fae. But don't be alarmed. I just wanted to make this video to sort of clear up a few misunderstandings about the fae, because we tend to get a pretty bad rap. But I just started going to get my master's in the mortal realm, and it's really exciting. Unfortunately, all the classes are online right now, so I don't actually have any chance to interact with any mortals, which was the goal. But it's okay. I thought I would take this chance to sort of go through some older fairy tales that my grandmother left behind. It's in this book right here, and as you can tell, it's pretty old and strange looking, but I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of really good information in here and will give me some insight into how mortals see fairies. Now, I know that there's a lot of information out there about fae. A lot of it probably inaccurate. I enjoy what mortals have done recently in regards to fae. Fairies, mermaids, all very romantic and very sweet. I can say that we are very romantic and very sweet, but there's a little bit more to us than that. So I'm going to take this time to look through this book and figure out what you guys used to think of us, or still think of us. Yeah, okay. I actually haven't opened this before, so I'm going to do it now. Wow, yeah, these pages are really old, and oh, that's weird. There's a bookmark in here. Oh, okay. This is interesting. This is the Little Mermaid. Now, I have a feeling that this Little Mermaid is not like the Little Mermaid that you see on TV, but we could read it and give it a go. What do you think? I think I'm gonna do it. Alright, so, the Little Mermaid. Far out at sea, where the water is as blue as the petals of the loveliest cornflower and as clear as the purest glass, but it's very deep, deeper than any anchor line can reach. Scores of church towers would have to be set on top of each other to reach from the bottom up to the surface of the water. Down there live the sea folk. So far, pretty accurate. Now, you mustn't think that there's nothing but bare white sandy bottom. No, the most wondrous trees and plants grow down there, with such supple stems and leaves that the slightest ripple in all the water, they move as if they were alive. All the fish, big and small, flit through the branches like birds here up in the sky. At the very deepest spot stands the Sea King's castle. The walls are made of coral, and the tall arched windows are of the clearest amber. But the roof is made of seashells that open and close with the flow of the water. How lovely it looks, because in each of them lie dazzling pearls, any one of which would be a great jewel in the crown of a queen. I mean, probably. Now, I don't know anything about plants that look like trees down there. I would have to probably consult one of my mermaid friends, but as you know, we're stuck inside, so I'm not sure I'd be able to do that right away. For many years, the Sea King had been a widower, though his old mother kept house for him. She was a wise woman, but proud of her noble birth, and that's why she had 12 oysters on her tail. Apparently that's a sign of privilege. The other nobles were only allowed to wear 6. Otherwise, she deserved high praise, especially because she was so fond of the little sea princesses, her granddaughters. All 6 were lovely children, but the youngest was the most beautiful of all. Her skin was as clear and soft as a rose petal, her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. Yet like the others, she had no feet. Her body ended in a fishtail. This is clearly for people who have never heard of a mermaid before in their lives. All day long they would play in the castle, in the great halls where living flowers grew out of the walls. When the big amber windows were opened, the fish swam in just like swallows fly in windows here. Oh no, I forgot how hard it is to turn pages with my hands. I wonder if my mortal hand would do better. There we go. The fish swam right up to the little princesses and ate out of their hands and let themselves be petted. Oh, that's adorable. Outside the castle, there was a great garden with fiery red and dark blue trees. The fruit gleamed like gold, and the blossoms like a blazing fire as they constantly fluttered their stalks and leaves. The ground itself was of the finest sand, but blue like flaming sulfur. A wondrous blue glow hovered over everything down there. You might also think you were high up in the air and could see nothing but sky both above and below, rather than being at the bottom of the ocean. In calm seas you could catch sight of the sun. It looked like a crimson flower for whose chalice all light steamed. Each of the little princesses had their own small plot in the garden where they could dig and plant as she liked. One of them gave her flower bed the shape of a whale. Another thought it better if hers looked more like a little mermaid. But the youngest made hers perfectly round like the sun, and planted only flowers that shone just as red. She was an odd child, quiet, pensive, relatable. While the other sisters adorned their gardens with the most wondrous things they had gathered from sunken ships, the only thing she wanted, other than the scarlet flowers that looked like the sun above, was a beautiful marble statue. It was a lovely boy carved from clear white stone, which had come to the sea floor with a shipwreck. Next to the statue she planted a crimson weeping willow that grew so gloriously, draping its fresh boughs over the statue and down to the blue sandy bottom, casting a violet shadow, which was in constant movement like the boughs. It looked as if the treetop and the roots were pretending to kiss. She had no greater joy than to hear about the human world up above. Her old grandmother had to tell her everything she knew about ships and cities, humans and animals. She thought it especially strange how lovely that up on earth the flowers had a fragrance, while those in the seafloor did not. That must be sad. I love the smell of flowers. And the forests were green, and the fish that could be seen among the branches could sing so loudly and beautifully that it was sheer delight. It was the little birds that her grandmother called fish, because otherwise they wouldn't understand her since they'd never seen a bird. Logical. When each of you turns 15, said the grandmother, you'll be allowed to go up to the surface of the sea, sit in the moonlight on the rocks, and look at the great ships sailing past. You'll see forests and cities. In the coming year, one of the sisters would turn 15, but the others... Well, each year was younger than the other, and the youngest of them still had a full 5 years before she could venture up from the bottom of the sea to find out what it looked like in our world. But each promised to tell the next what she had seen and what she found most lovely on her first day. Their grandmother hadn't told them enough, and there was so much they wanted to know. None of them was as full of yearning as the youngest sister, the one who had the longest to wait and was so quiet and pensive. Many a night she would stand at the open window and gaze up through the dark water where the fish were flapping their fins and tails. She could see the moon and stars, even though their glow was quite pale. Through the water they looked much bigger than they do at our eyes. If a black cloud seemed to pass beneath them, she knew it was either a whale swimming above or a ship full of people. It probably never occurred to them that a lovely little mermaid was standing below, stretching her white hands towards the keel. The oldest princess turned 15 and could venture up to the surface of the sea. When she returned, she had hundreds of things to tell them. She said that the loveliest of all was lying in the moonlight on a sandbar in the calm sea and looking at the great city close to shore, where the light sparkled like hundreds of stars, listening to the music and the noise and commotion of the coaches and people, seeing all the church towers and spires, hearing the bells ring, and the very fact that she couldn't go there made her yearn for it all the more. I completely understand this. When I first heard about the moral world, I was absolutely fascinated. But now, there's so many other things that you get to look forward to. Like technology, which we still don't have, but one thing we do have is magic. Oh, how the youngest sister listened. And later that evening, as she stood at the open window and gazed up through the dark blue water, she thought about the great city with all its noise and commotion, and she imagined she could hear the sound of the church bells reaching down to her. The following year, the second sister was allowed to rise up through the water and swim wherever she liked. She reached the surface just as the sun went down, and that was the sight she found the loveliest of all. The whole sky looked like gold, she said, and the clouds, well, their loveliness she couldn't possibly describe. Red and violet they had sailed above her, but even faster, like a long white veil, flew a flock of wild swans over the water in front of the sun. She swam toward it, but it sank, and the rosy glow was extinguished by the surface of the sea and the clouds. The next year, the third sister went above. She was the most daring of them all, and that's why she swam along a wide river that flowed into the sea. She saw lovely green hills with grapevines, castles, and manor houses that peeked out from the magnificent forests. She heard all the birds singing, and the sunshine was so hot that she often had to dive under the water to cool her burning face. In a little bay she came upon a whole flock of tiny human children. Quite naked, they ran around and splashed in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they ran off in fright, and a little black animal appeared. It was a dog, but she had never seen a dog before. It barked at her so fiercely that she was frightened and retreated to the open sea. But she would never forget the magnificent forests, the green hills, and the enchanting children who could swim in the water, even though they had no fishtails. Yes, that is one thing I wanted to do when I was younger. I wanted to play with human children, but, they might have found this a little bit disturbing. Nowadays, maybe not so much, but back then, yes, horns can be a little frightening for young children. The fourth sister was not so daring. She stayed out in the wild sea and claimed that it was the loveliest place of all. You could see for miles around, and the sky overhead was just like a great glass bell. She saw ships, but far away. They looked like black-beaked seagulls. The amusing dolphins had turned somersaults, and the enormous whales had sprayed water out of their nostrils, so it looked like hundreds of fountains all around. Then it was the fifth sister's turn. Her birthday was in the winter, and that's why she saw what the others had not seen on their first time. The sea had turned quite green, and all around floated great icebergs. She said each of them looked like a pearl and yet was much bigger than the church towers that humans built. They appeared in the most wondrous of shapes and glittered like diamonds. She sat down on one of the largest, and all the sailing ships tacked in terror around the place where she sat, as she let the wind blow through her long hair. But toward evening the sky was covered with clouds. Lightning flashed and thunder roared, while the black sea lifted the icebergs high in the air, making them gleam with red lightning. On all the ships they took in the sails, while fear and horror reigned. But she sat calmly on her drifting iceberg and watched the blue lightning bolts zigzag down to strike the gleaming sea. The first time one of the sisters went up to the surface, she was always delighted by everything new and beautiful that she saw. But now that they were grown and allowed to go there whenever they liked, it no longer interested them. They longed for home, and after a month's time they would say that down below was the most beautiful place of all, and that's where they felt the most comfortable. Many an evening the five sisters would link arms and in a row rise up to the surface of the water. They had lovely voices, more beautiful than any humans. Whenever a storm was raging, they thought the ships might be wrecked. They would swim before the ships and sing wondrously about how beautiful it was at the bottom of the sea, telling the sailors not to be afraid to go there. But the men couldn't understand their words. They thought it was the storm, and they'd never had a chance to see all the loveliest down below, because when the ship sank, They would drown and come only as dead men to the Sea King's castle. It is very sad. Even fae that live in forests and, urban settings, we also can't see the bottom of the sea because we would drown, so I relate. In the evening, when the sisters would rise up arm in arm through the sea, their little sister would be left behind all alone to gaze after them. She felt as if she could cry, but a mermaid has no tears, and so she suffers even more. "Oh, if only I were 15, she said. "I'm sure that I will come to love the world up above, and the human beings who live there." Finally, she turned 15. Nice transition. "Well, now we'll have you off our hands," said the grandmother, the old dowager queen. "Come here and let me dress you up like your sisters." She put a wreath of white lilies on her hair, but every flower petal was half a pearl, and the old woman made 8 big oysters clamp onto the tail of the princess to show her high birth. "Ow, that hurts," said the little mermaid. "Yes, but we do have to suffer a little for our finery," said the old woman. Oh, how gladly she would have shaken off that splendor and removed that heavy wreath. The red flowers in her garden suited her much better, but she didn't dare change things now. "Farewell," she said, and rose as easily and brightly as a bubble through the water. The sun had just gone down, and she raised her head out of the sea, but all the clouds were still glittering like roses and gold, and in the midst of the pale pink sky gleamed the evening star, so lovely and clear. The air was mild and fresh, and the sea perfectly still. She saw a big ship with 3 masts. Only a single sail was raised because not a gust of wind was blowing, and the sailors sat in all the rigging and on the yards. There was music and song, and as the evening grew darker, hundreds of colored lanterns were lit. They looked like flags of every nation fluttering in the air. The little mermaid swam right up to the cabin window, and each time the waves lifted her in the air, she could see through the mirror-like panes at all the elegantly dressed people. Yet the most handsome of all was the young prince with the big dark eyes. He was probably no more than 16. It was his birthday, and that was the reason for all the splendor. The sailors danced on deck, and when the young prince stepped outside, more than 100 rockets shot up into the sky. They lit up the bright daylight, so the little mermaid grew quite frightened and dove down underwater. But she soon poked her head up again, and then all the stars in the sky seemed like they were falling toward her. Never had she seen such fiery magic. Huge suns spun around, magnificent firefish swung in the blue sky, and everything was reflected in the clear, calm sea. On board the ship itself, everything was so bright that you could see even the smallest line, not to mention all the people. Oh, how handsome the young prince was. He shook hands with all the men, laughing and smiling as the music resounded through the lovely night. It grew late, but the little mermaid couldn't tear her eyes away from the ship or the lovely prince. The colorful lanterns were put out, and the rockets no longer rose up to the sky, nor were there any more cannon volleys, but deep down in sea there was droning and rumbling, and all the while she sat in the water, bobbing up and down so she could look into the cabin. But the ship began to pick up speed, one sail after the other catching wind. Now the swells grew stronger. Huge clouds gathered, lightning flashed in the distance. A terrible storm was coming. That's why the sailors were reefing the sails. The big ship pitched at a racing speed on the wild sea. The water rose up like great black mountains that threatened to pour over the mast. But the ship dove like a swan down beneath the high waves, letting itself be lifted up again on the towering swells. The little mermaid thought the pace amusing, but the sailors did not. The ship creaked and crashed. The thick planks burst at the powerful thrusts that the sea made at the ship. The mast snapped in half, as if it were a reed, and the ship lurched onto its side as water rushed into the hold. Now the little mermaid saw that they were in danger. Even she had to watch out for falling debris and beams from the ship that were drifting around in the water. For an instant it was so pitch black that she couldn't see a thing. But when lightning flashed, it was once again so bright she could make out everyone on board. Each person was managing as best he could. She looked in particular for the young prince, and when the ship broke apart she saw him sink deep down into the sea. She was at once filled with great joy, because now he would be coming down to her. But then she remembered that humans couldn't live in the water, and that he couldn't come down to her father's castle except as a dead man. No, he mustn't die. So she swam in among the timbers and planks floating in the sea, completely forgetting that they could have crushed her. She dove deeper underwater and then rose up high among the waves and at last reached the young prince, who couldn't swim much longer in the raging sea. His arms and legs had begun to tire. His beautiful eyes had closed. He would have died if the little mermaid hadn't come. She held his head above water and let the waves carry her with him wherever they liked. By morning, the storm had passed. There was not a scrap of the ship in sight. The sun, red and glowing, rose up out of the water and seemed to bring life to the cheeks of the prince, but his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his beautiful high forehead and stroked back his wet hair. She thought he looked like the marble statue down in her little garden. She kissed him again and wished that he might live. Now she saw before her dry land with tall blue mountains. On the crest glinted white snow as if swans were resting there. Down near the shore stood lovely green forests, and in front of them a church or a cloister. She wasn't quite sure, but there was some kind of building. Lemon and orange trees grew in the garden, and before the gate stood tall palm trees. Here the sea formed a little bay that was perfectly still, but very deep, all the way up to the dunes where fine white sand had washed ashore. That's where she swam with the handsome prince, and placed him on the sand, taking great care that his head lay high up in the warm sunshine. Then the bells began ringing in the big white building, and scores of young girls came walking through the garden. The little mermaid swam further out behind several high rocks that were sticking up out of the water. She put sea foam on her hair and breasts so no one could see her little face, and then she waited to see who would come for the poor prince. It wasn't long before a young girl approached. She seemed to be quite frightened, though only for a moment. Then she summoned more people, and the mermaid saw that the prince began to revive, and that he smiled at everyone standing around him. But he didn't smile at the mermaid, nor did he know that she had saved his life. She felt so sad, and when he was led inside the big building, she sorrowfully dove into the water and made her way home to her father's castle. She had always been quiet and pensive, but now she was even more so. Her sisters asked her what she had seen on her first trip above, but she told them nothing. Many an evening and morning she would rise up to the spot where she had left the prince. She saw how the fruit in the garden grew ripe and was picked. She saw how the snow melted on the high mountains, but she did not see the prince. And so she always returned home sadder than before. There her only solace was to sit in her little garden and throw her arms around the beautiful marble statue that looked like the prince. But she neglected her flowers. As if in a wilderness they grew out over the pathways, weaving their long stalks and leaves onto the branches of the trees, so it was quite dark. Finally she could bear it no longer, and told one of her sisters, and then all the others instantly found out about it, because that's how sisters work. But no one else, apart from a couple of other mermaids who didn't tell anyone, except for their closest girlfriends. Sure, we'll believe that. One of them, who knew who the prince was. She'd also seen the splendor aboard the ship and knew he came where his kingdom lay. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses. With their arms around each other's shoulders, they rose up out of the sea in a long row, right in front of the palace where they knew the prince's castle stood. The castle was built of gleaming pale yellow stone, with great marble staircases, one of which reached all the way down to the sea. Magnificent gilded domes rose above the rooftop, and between the columns that surrounded the whole building stood marble images that looked alive. Through the clear panes of the tall windows they could look into the most splendid halls hung with costly silk curtains and tapestries, and all the walls were adorned with enormous paintings that were a pleasure to see. In the middle of the largest hall splashed a great fountain. The spray reached high up towards the glass dome and the roof, which the sun shone on the water and on the lovely plants growing in the huge basin. Now she knew where he lived, and that's where she went, swimming through the water on many an evening and night. I guess mermaids can be stalkers too. She swam much closer to the land than any of the others had dared. She even went all the way up to the narrow canal beneath the magnificent marble balcony that cast a long shadow over the water. Here she would sit and gaze at the young prince, who thought he was quite alone in the clear moonlight. Don't stalk people. This is a fairy tale. He knew nothing of this and could not even dream about her. She grew more and more fond of human beings. She wished more and more that she might rise up among them. The world seemed so much larger than her own. They could fly across the sea in ships and climb the highest mountains far above the clouds. And the lands they own, with forests and fields, stretched much farther than she could see. There was so much she wanted to know, but her sisters couldn't answer all her questions. That's why she asked her old grandmother, who was very familiar with the world above, which she quite rightly called the lands above the sea. "If humans don't drown," said the Little Mermaid, "can they live forever? Don't they die like we do down here in the sea?" "Of course they do," said the old woman. "They have to die too, and their lifetime is much shorter than ours. We can live 300 years. But when we cease to exist, we become nothing more than foam on the water without even a grave down here among our loved ones. We have no immortal soul. There is no more life for us. We're like the green reed. Once it is cut, it will never be green again. Humans, on the other hand, have a soul that lives forever, lives on after the body is turned to dust. It rises up through the clear air, up to all the shining stars, just as we rise up from the sea to look at the land of the humans. They rise up to the lovely unknown places that we will never see." "Why weren't we given immortal souls?" asked the mermaid sadly. "I would give all 300 years of my life to be a human for just one day, and then have a share in the heavenly world." "You mustn't go around thinking like that," said the old woman. "We're much happier and better off than the humans up there." "So I'm going to die and drift like foam on the sea? No longer hear the music of the waves, or see the lovely flowers and the crimson sun? Is there nothing I can do to win an eternal soul?" "No," said the old woman. "Only if a human were to love you so much that you were dearer to him than his father and mother. If he clung to you with all his thoughts and love, and had the priest put his right hand in yours, promising faithfulness now and for all eternity, then his soul would flow into your body, and you too would share the happiness of humans. He would give you a soul and yet keep his own. But that will never happen. That which is so lovely here in the sea, your fishtail, they consider hideous up on earth. They don't know any better. Up there you would have to have 2 clumsy pillars that they call legs in order to be beautiful." I feel like nowadays humans are more understanding, and they would absolutely love a mermaid. I don't know about this whole mermaids don't have an immortal soul business. I think that's something that they created specifically for this fairy tale, but then again, I'll have to ask one of my mermaid friends. Then the Little Mermaid sighed and looked sadly at her own fishtail. "Let's be happy," said the old woman. "We should leap and bound for 300 years, and that's ours to live. Surely that's long enough, and later you can rest in your grave and all the more content. Tonight we're going to have a royal ball." And there was such splendor that had never been seen on earth. The walls and ceilings of the great ballroom were made of thick but clear glass. Hundreds of enormous seashells, rose red and grass green, were lined up on either side. A fire burning blue lit up the entire hall and shone through the walls so that the sea outside was illuminated. Countless fish were visible, big and small, swimming towards the glass wall. On some of them gleamed purplish-red scales. On others they looked like silver and gold. Down the middle of the hall flowed a wide, rippling stream, on which the mermen and mermaids were dancing to their own lovely songs. No humans on earth had heard such beautiful voices. The Little Mermaid sang more beautifully than anyone else, and they clapped their hands for her. For a moment she felt joy in her heart because she knew that she had the most beautiful voice of anyone on earth or in the sea. But soon she started thinking once more about the world up above. She couldn't forget the handsome prince, or her sorrow at not possessing, as he did, an immortal soul. That's why she slipped out of her father's castle, and while everything inside was song and merriment, she sat sadly in her little garden. Then she heard the sound of hunting horns echoing through the water, and she thought, "Now he's probably sailing." My camera was very rude and turned off. I'll scold it later. Alright, where were we? We were There we go. Now he's probably sailing up there. The one I love more than my father or mother. The one my thoughts cling to and whose hand I wish to place my life's happiness. I would risk everything to win him and an immortal soul. While my sisters are dancing inside my father's castle, I'll go to the sea witch, the one who has always terrified me. Maybe she can offer help and advice. That's a horrible idea. I'm going to just say this. There are many different types of witches. There are some witches that believe in dark magic, and some witches that believe in white magic, and everything in between. If this witch terrifies you, I have a bad feeling about you going to her for advice. But, maybe I'm wrong. Then the little mermaid left her garden and set off for the roaring maelstroms. Behind them lived the witch. She had never gone that way before, where no flowers grew, nor seagrass. Already red flags. Nothing but the bare, gray, sandy bottom stretched toward the maelstroms, where the currents, like roaring mill wheels, swirled around and pulled everything they seized down into the depths. She would have to pass through these crushing whirlpools in order to reach the territory of the sea witch. For a long section there was no other path other than the hot, bubbling mire, the witch called her peat bog. Beyond it stood her house, in the midst of a peculiar forest. All the trees and shrubs were polyps, half animal and half plant. They looked like 100-headed snakes growing out of the ground. All their branches were long, slimy arms with fingers like slithery worms. They rippled joint by joint from their roots to the very tips. They grabbed tightly around anything in the sea that they could grab, and they never let go. The little mermaid was quite terrified as she stood there at the edge. Her heart was pounding with fear, as it should be. You can turn around and stop this, but you're not going to, because there's more to this story. She tied up her long, fluttering hair so the polyps wouldn't be able to catch her by grabbing hold of it. She pressed both hands to her breast, and she flew off, the way a fish can fly through the water, and among the hideous polyps that reached out their supple arms and fingers towards her. She saw how each of them was holding something that it had caught. Hundreds of tiny arms were wrapped around it like strong iron bands. Humans who had perished at the sea and sunk into the deep peered out as white bones from the arms of the polyps. Rudders and sea chests were held tight in their grip. The skeletons of land animals and the little mermaid they had caught and strangled for her, that was... Oh, God! And a little mermaid they had caught and strangled. For her, that was the most terrifying of all. This is bad news. Get out of there. What are you doing? What? She came to a great slimy clearing in the forest where huge fat water snakes romped, showing off their disgusting yellowish white bellies. In the middle of the clearing, a house had been built from the white bones of shipwrecked humans. There sat the sea witch, letting a toad eat from her mouth, the way humans let canaries eat sugar. She called the hideous fat water snakes her little chickens and let them swarm over her, all over her. That's a little explicit. I'm not going to read that. I know what you want, said the sea witch. How stupid of you! But I'm going to grant you your wish because it will bring you misfortune, my lovely princess. You want to get rid of your fishtail and instead have 2 stumps to walk on like a human being. Because then the young prince will fall in love with you and you can swim along with an immortal soul. With that, the witch began laughing so loudly and horribly that the toad and the water snakes fell to the ground, tumbling all around. You've come just in time, said the witch. By tomorrow when the sun comes up, I wouldn't be able to help you until another year had passed. I'm going to make you a potion to take with you. Before the sun comes up, swim to land and sit down on the shore and drink it. Then your tail will split in 2 and shrink to what the humans call charming legs. But it will be painful. It will feel like a sharp sword is passing through you. Everyone who sees you will say you're the loveliest human child they've ever seen. You'll keep your graceful movements. No dancer will ever glide as you do. But every step you take will feel like you're treading on a sharp knife and make your blood flow. If you're willing to endure all that, then I'll help you. No! Absolutely not! Yes, said the little mermaid in a quavering voice, thinking about the prince and about winning an immortal soul. But remember, said the witch, once you've taken human form, you can never be a mermaid again. You can never come back into the water to your sisters or to your father's castle. And if you don't win the love of the prince so that he forgets his father and mother and clings to you with all his thoughts and lets the priest place your hand so that you may become husband and wife, then you won't get an immortal soul. On the first morning after he marries another, your heart will burst and you will become foam in the water. That's what I want, said the little mermaid, and she was as pale as death, as she should be. This is a very big decision for a 15-year-old. But you also have to pay me, said the witch. This keeps getting worse. And it's not a small thing that I demand. You have the loveliest voice of anyone here in the bottom of the sea. You're probably thinking of using it to charm him, but your voice you must give to me. I want the best thing you possess in return for my precious potion. My own blood I have to give to make you the drink as sharp as a double-edged sword. But if you take my voice, said the little mermaid, what will I have left? Your lovely figure, said the witch. Bad. Your graceful movements and your expressive eyes. Surely you can use them to captivate a human heart. Well, have you lost your courage? Stick out your little tongue, I'll cut it off as payment, and then I'll give you the powerful potion. Agreed, said the little mermaid. And the witch put on her kettle to brew the magic potion. Cleanliness is a good thing, she said, and scoured the kettle with water snakes, which she tied into a knot. Then she made a cut on her breast and let her black blood ooze out. The steam formed the strangest shapes, fearsome and dreadful. The witch kept putting new things into the kettle, and when it was boiling properly it sounded like a crocodile crying. Finally the potion was ready, and it looked like the clearest water. There you have it, said the witch, and cut off the little mermaid's tongue so she was now mute and could neither sing nor speak. If the polyps happen to grab you on your way back through the forest, said the witch, toss a single drop of the potion at them, and their arms and fingers will burst into 1,000 pieces. But the little mermaid didn't have to do that. The polyps shrank from her in terror when they saw the shining potion that glowed in her hand, just as if it were a sparkling star. In this manner she quickly passed through the forests, the bog, and the roaming maelstroms. She could see her father's castle. The torches had been extinguished in the grand ballroom, and no doubt everyone was asleep inside. But she didn't dare go to them. Now that she was mute and about to leave them forever, her heart felt as if it would break with sorrow. She slipped into the garden, took a flower from each of her sister's flower beds, blew thousands of kisses towards the castle, and rose up through the dark blue sea. The sun had not yet come up when she saw the prince's castle, and mounted the magnificent marble staircase. The moon was shining wondrously bright. The little mermaid drank the fiery, bitter potion, and she felt as if a double-edged sword passed through her delicate body. She fainted and lay there as if she were dead. When the sun was shining over the sea, she woke and felt a searing pain. But right in front of her stood the handsome young prince. He fixed his coal-black eyes on her, making her lower her own, and she saw that her fishtail was gone. She had the most charming little white legs that any young girl could have, but she was quite naked. That's why she wrapped herself in her long, thick hair. Yeah, she didn't ask a sea witch for clothes. The prince asked who she was and how she'd happened to come there, and she gave him a look that was so tender and yet so sad with her dark blue eyes, not a word she could say. Then he took her by the hand and led her to the castle. Each step she took, as the witch had warned her, felt as if she were treading on pointed awls and sharp knives, but she gladly endured it. Hand in hand with the prince, she moved lightly as a bubble, and he and everyone else marveled at her graceful gliding walk. Okay, so he adopted a naked girl who can't speak. Amazing, cool. This is just an everyday life in fairy tales. She was given precious garments of silk and linen. In the castle, she was the most beautiful of all, but she was mute. She could neither sing nor speak. Lovely girls dressed in silk and gold appeared to sing for the prince and his royal parents. One sang more beautifully than all the others, and the prince clapped his hands and smiled at her. Then the little mermaid grew sad. She knew that she used to sing much more beautifully. She thought, oh, if only he knew that in order to be with him I had to give up my voice for all eternity. Now the girls were dancing, a graceful swaying dance to the most glorious music. The little mermaid raised her beautiful white arms, stood up on her toes, and floated across the floor, dancing as no one had before. With every movement, her loveliness became more and more apparent, and her eyes spoke deeper to the heart than the songs of any of the other girls. Everyone was delighted, especially the prince, who called her his little foundling. She kept on dancing and dancing, even though every time her feet touched the ground it felt as if she were treading on sharp knives. The prince said that she would stay with him forever, and she was allowed to sleep outside his door on a velvet cushion. Oh God, she's a pet. She's a pet. Oh no. He had men's clothing sewn for her that she could go out riding with him. They rode through the fragrant forest where the green branches slapped at her shoulder and the little birds sang from behind the fresh leaves. With the prince she climbed up the steep mountains, and even though her delicate feet bled so that the others noticed, she merely laughed and followed him until they saw the clouds sailing below, as if they were a flock of birds heading up for foreign lands. Back at home in the prince's castles, when the others were asleep at night, she would go out to the wide marble stairs to cool her burning feet by standing in the cold sea water. Then she would think about everyone below in the deep. One night, her sisters came, arm in arm. They sang so sorrowfully as they swam through the water. She waved to them, and they recognized her and told her how sad she had made them all. Every night after that they visited her. One night she saw, far in the distance, her old grandmother, who had not been to the surface for many years, and the Sea King wearing his crown on his head. They stretched out their hands towards each other, but they didn't come close to the land as their sister dared. Day by day, the prince's affection for her grew. He loved her the way you might love a good, dear child, but it never occurred to him to make her his queen, and she had to become his wife, or she would never have an immortal soul. On the morning after he was wed, she would become foam on the sea. There's many different kinds of love, and none of them are invalid, or better than the other. But sometimes people just don't feel the same way about you that you do about them, and that's okay. In this case, though, it's very bad. Aren't you more fond of me than all the others? The little mermaid's eyes seemed to say whenever he took her in his arms and kissed her beautiful forehead. Yes, you are the dearest of all to me, said the prince, because you have the best heart of any of them. You are more devoted to me, and you look like a young girl I once saw, but will probably never find again. I was on a ship that went down. The waves carried me to land near a holy temple where many young girls were in service. The youngest of them found me on the shore and saved my life. I only saw her twice. She was the only one I could love in this world. But you look like her. You've almost replaced her image in my soul. She belongs to the holy temple, and that's why my good fortune has sent you to me. We will never part. Oh, gosh. Oh, that hurt so bad. To hear the person you love tell you, you remind me of someone that I will never, ever let go of. Wow. Oh, that hurts. Oh, he doesn't know I saved his life, thought the little mermaid. I carried him across the sea to the forest where the temple stands. I sat behind the foam and watched to see if the humans would come. I saw the beautiful girl that he loves more than me. And the mermaid sighed deeply. She could not cry. The girl belongs to the holy temple, he said, and she'll never come out to the world. They will never meet again. But I'm here, and I see him every day. I will care for him and love him and offer him my life. Everyone said that now the prince was supposed to marry and take his wife, the lovely daughter of the neighboring king. That's why he was outfitting such a magnificent ship. People said that the prince was going to visit the lands of the neighboring king, but it was actually to visit the neighboring king's daughter. He would take a large entourage with him. Oh dear, this is going to be so bad. The little mermaid shook her head and laughed. She knew the prince's thoughts much better than anyone else. I have to go, he had told her. I have to see the beautiful princess. My parents demand it. But they would never force me to bring her home as my bride. I cannot love her. She doesn't look like the beautiful girl in the temple, the one that you resemble. If ever I should choose a bride, it would more likely to be you, my mute foundling with the expressive eyes. And he kissed her red lips, played with her long hair, and placed his head on her heart, making it dream of human happiness and a mortal soul. This is torture. This poor young girl. This is horrible. You're not afraid of the sea, my mute child, are you? He said, when they stood on board the magnificent ship that would carry him to the neighboring king's lands. And he told her about the storms and becalmed seas, about strange fish in the deep and what his diver had seen there. She smiled at his tales because she knew better than anyone else about the bottom of the sea. In the moonlit night, when everyone else was asleep except for the helmsman, who stood at the wheel, she sat near the railing of the ship and stared down to the clear water. She thought she could see her father's castle. At the very top stood her old grandmother with a silver crown on her head, staring through the turbulent currents towards the ship's keel. Then her sisters rose up to the surface. They stared at her in sorrow and wrung their white hands. She waved to them, smiling, and wanting to tell them that she was well and happy, but the cabin boy was approaching, and her sisters dove down. So he continued to think that the white he had seen was foam on the sea. Next morning, the ship sailed into the harbor of the neighboring king's magnificent city. All the church bells were ringing, and trumpets blew from the tall towers where soldiers stood with fluttering banners and flashing bayonets. Each day there was a celebration. Balls and banquets followed one another, but the princess was still not in attendance. They said she was being brought up far away in a holy temple where she was learning all the royal virtues. At last she arrived. Oh, God. Oh, hi there. The little mermaid was eager to see her beauty, and she had to admit she had never seen a more enchanting figure. Her skin was delicate and glowing. Behind her long dark lashes smiled a pair of deep blue, loyal eyes. It's you, said the prince. You're the one who saved me when I lay like a corpse on the shore. And he pulled his blushing bride into his arms. Oh, I'm much too happy, he said to the little mermaid. The best thing of all, what I never dared hope for, has been granted to me. You'll rejoice at my happiness, since you are more fond of me than all the others. And the little mermaid kissed his hand, feeling as if her heart were already breaking. The morning after his wedding would bring her death and turn her into foam on the sea. This is why you don't make assumptions about humans that you don't know, because humans are fickle and they have their own desires, and oh God, oh Lord, sad. All the church bells rang, and the heralds rode through the streets proclaiming the betrothal. On the altars burned fragrant oils and precious silver lamps. The priests swung vessels of incense, and the bride and groom joined hands and received the bishop's blessing. The little mermaid stood there in silk and gold, holding the bridal train. But her ears did not hear the festive music. Her eyes did not see the holy ceremony. She was thinking about her death night, about all that she had lost in this world. That very same night the bride and groom went on board the ship. Cannons roared, all the flags waved, and in the middle of the ship a costly tent of gold and purple had been raised with the loveliest cushions. That's where the bridal couple would sleep in the quiet, cool night. The sails billowed in the wind, and the ships glided easily and smoothly over the clear sea. When it grew dark, colorful lamps were lit, and the sailors danced merry dances on deck. The little mermaid couldn't help thinking about the first time she came to the surface and saw the same splendor and joy. She too began whirling around in the dance, darting like a swallow does when it's being pursued, and everyone cheered in admiration. Never had she danced so gloriously. It felt as if sharp knives were cutting her delicate feet, but she didn't notice. The pain in her heart was much sharper. She knew that in this was the last evening she would see for the one whom she had abandoned her family and her home, given up her lovely voice, and suffered endless daily torments, although he never knew. This was the last night that she would breathe the same air as he did, see the deep oceans and the starry blue sky. An eternal night without thought or dream awaited her, since she had no soul and could not win one. Everything was joy and merriment on the ship until long after midnight. She laughed and danced with the thought of death in her heart. The prince kissed his lovely bride, and she played with his black hair, and arm in arm they retired to the magnificent tent. It grew quiet and still on the ship. Only the helmsman stood at the wheel. The little mermaid rested her white arms on the railing and looked to the east for the red of dawn. She knew that the first ray of sunlight would kill her. Then she saw her sisters rise up from the sea. They were as pale as she was, and their beautiful long hair no longer fluttered in the breeze. It had been cut off. "We gave it to the witch so she would help us and you wouldn't have to die tonight. She gave us a knife. Here it is. See how sharp it is? Before the sun comes up, you must stab the prince in the heart. When his warm blood drips onto your feet, they'll grow together into a fishtail and you'll be a mermaid again, and you can come back to the water with us and live out your 300 years until you turn dead, salty sea foam. Hurry! Either he or you must die before the sun comes up. Our old grandmother is grieving so that her white hair has fallen out, just as ours fell to the witch's scissors. Kill the prince and come back. Hurry! Do you see that red stripe in the sky? In a few minutes the sun will come up and you must die." And they uttered a strange deep sigh and sank into the waves. The little mermaid pulled aside the purple drapes of the tent and looked at the lovely bride sleeping with her head on the prince's breast. She bent down and kissed him on his beautiful forehead, looked up at the sky where the red of dawn was shining stronger and stronger. She took the sharp knife and fixed her eyes once more on the prince, who in his dreams called his bride by name. She was the only one in his thoughts. The knife trembled in the mermaid's hand, but then she flung it far out into the waves. They shone red where it fell, and looked like drops of blood were trickling up from the water. One more time, with her eyes half glazed, she looked at the prince. Then she threw herself from the ship into the sea and felt her body dissolve into foam. Now the sun rose out of the sea. Its rays fell so gentle and warm on the deadly cold sea foam. But the little mermaid did not feel death. She looked at the bright sun, and above her hovered hundreds of lovely transparent creatures. Through them she could see the white sails of the ship and the red clouds of the sky. Their voices were melodious, but so ethereal that no human ear could hear them, just as no earthly eye could see them. Without wings, they floated through the air, carried by their own lightness. The little mermaid saw that she had a body like theirs, and was rising higher and higher out of the foam. "Who am I joining?" she said. Her voice rang like those of the other creatures, so ethereal that no earthly music could reproduce it. "The daughters of the air," the others replied. "A mermaid has no immortal soul, and can never have one unless she wins the love of a human being. Her eternal life depends on an outside power. The daughters of the air have no eternal souls either, but through good deeds they can create one for themselves. We fly to the warm countries where the sultry, pestilent air is killing human beings. There we fan a cool breeze. We spread the scent of flowers through the air and bring relief to the healing. After 300 years of striving to do what good we can, we will be granted immortal souls and share in the eternal joy of humans. Poor little mermaid, you've tried with all your heart to do the same as we have. You've suffered and endured, raising yourself to the world of the sylphs. Now through good deeds you too can create an immortal soul for yourself in 300 years. And the little mermaid raised her clear arms up towards God's Son, and for the first time she felt tears. On the ship there was life and commotion once more. She saw the prince, with his beautiful bride looking for her. Mournfully they stared out into the frothing foam, as if they knew she had thrown herself to the waves. Invisible, she kissed the bride's forehead and smiled to the prince, then rose up with the other children of the air into the crimson cloud that was sailing into the sky. In 300 years we will float like this into God's kingdom. We might come there even sooner, one whispered. Invisible, we float into human houses where there are children. For each day that we find a good child who makes his parents happy and deserves their love, God shortens our time of trial. The child doesn't know when we might fly through the room, and if then we can smile with the joy of the child, 1 year is subtracted from the 300. But if we see a naughty and bad child, then we have to weep tears of sorrow, and every tear adds another day to our time of trial. And that's the end of The Little Mermaid. Well, it didn't end all that badly. She gets to earn an immortal soul, which was the whole point of her going up there in the first place. She didn't get her love, but hopefully, if there's good children in the world, she will have reached her goal by now. I'm not so sure that that's real. I have never heard of air beings like that. Then again, if human beings can't see them, who's saying that Fae can't see them either? It's a possibility. I don't know. It's interesting, though, reading that book, and then also thinking back to that book was probably for young children, telling them to be very good, so they didn't have to be bad, and add more days of life to the air creatures, which is fair. I appreciate that moral. Children shouldn't be bad anyways, and always listen to their parents and be very respectful. Here you go. Well, thank you so much for watching, and maybe I'll do another one of these. There's lots of things here in this book that I haven't even begun to explore. Ooh, there's one called the Snow Queen. And the Marsh King's daughter. There's plenty more here to see. So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day. Hopefully soon enough I won't have to stay here in this room anymore and I'll actually be able to interact with human beings again, but until then, this is fine.